As dawn breaks over the North Atlantic, the Artemis, a seasoned fishing vessel, glides silently across the calm waters. The light fog hanging low over the sea has a certain eeriness to it, and the crew, seasoned fishermen, feel it too. These are men who have spent their lives on the water, battling storms, unpredictable tides, and the unknown lurking beneath the surface. But today, something feels different. Captain Henry, a sturdy man in his 50s with a sun-beaten face and weathered hands, is up on the bridge scanning the horizon. He's been at sea for decades, yet something about today gnaws at him. A sense of unease he can't quite shake. "Cap, we heading to the usual spot?" asks Tom, the first mate, interrupting Henry's thoughts. Henry nods, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Aye, but keep an eye out. Ocean's acting strange today." As they move further out, the water grows unusually still, almost like glass. The usual cries of seabirds are absent, adding to the unsettling silence. The crew can feel the tension as they prepare the gear, sharing wary glances but keeping their thoughts to themselves. Suddenly, about 50 yards off the starboard side, something breaches the surface. A massive, dark shape. It moves slowly, creating ripples that spread across the still water. The crew stops what they're doing, all eyes on the strange sight. What is that?" whispers Jake, the youngest deckhand. Captain Henry grabs his binoculars and focuses on the shape. His heart skips a beat as he realizes what they're looking at. A dorsal fin, towering nearly 6 feet above the water, and just below it, the shadow of an enormous creature. "It's a shark," Henry mutters, barely believing his own eyes. A massive one. As the Artemis drifts closer, the full scale of the creature comes into view. The shark is easily as long as their vessel, close to 40 feet, a size almost unheard of in these waters. It's a great white, but far larger than any they've ever seen. The crew stands in silent awe, taking in the sight of this giant predator gliding effortlessly through the water. "Must be close to 2 tons, says Tom, his voice a mix of fear and admiration. But there's something off. The shark seems lethargic, almost as if it's injured. The crew can see scars and fresh gashes along its side, some of them bleeding into the water. Captain Henry's instincts kick in. "Bring us in closer," he orders, his voice steady but tense. "I want a better look." As they approach, they see more details. A large chunk missing from the shark's dorsal fin, scratches along its flank, and what appears to be a deep wound near its tail. It's clear the creature has been through a recent battle, likely with another large predator or perhaps a struggle with a ship's propeller. The shark turns slightly, and for a brief moment, it seems to look right at them. There's a collective shiver among the crew as they meet the creature's black, lifeless eyes. Despite the injuries, there's an undeniable power in the animal's presence, a raw, primal energy that reminds them just how small they are in the vastness of the ocean. Captain Henry finally breaks the silence. "Looks like he's on his last legs, or fins," he says, a hint of sympathy in his voice. But before anyone can respond, there's a sudden jolt. The Artemis rocks violently, as if something has struck the hull. The men scramble, grabbing onto whatever they can to keep from being thrown overboard. "Did we hit something?" shouts one of the deckhands, his voice laced with panic. "Impossible. We're in open water," Tom replies, though he doesn't sound convinced. The boat steadies and everyone regains their footing, but the sense of unease has turned into full-blown dread. Captain Henry rushes to the edge, scanning the water below, and that's when he sees it. A second shadow, larger than the first, circling beneath the boat. "Another shark?" asks Jake, his voice barely a whisper. Henry shakes his head slowly. "No, it's something else." Just then, the surface of the water erupts as a massive orca breaches, its sleek black and white body arching through the air before crashing back down, sending a spray of salt water over the deck. The killer whale circles the injured shark, moving with an intensity that's almost predatory. The crew watches in stunned silence as the orca approaches the great white, its presence unmistakably menacing. Captain Henry has heard of orcas attacking sharks before, but he's never seen anything like this up close. The orca appears to be toying with the shark, diving beneath it and nudging it from below, almost as if testing its strength. Orcas. They're known to hunt great whites in these waters, Henry explains, more to himself than to the crew. But to see one this size, this close, it's rare. The crew watches, transfixed, as the killer whale circles its wounded prey. Every so often, the shark thrashes, trying to swim away, but its injuries are too severe. The orca closes in, nudging the shark with increasing force until, finally, it delivers a fatal blow, a powerful headbutt to the shark's side. The great white shudders, then goes limp, sinking slowly beneath the waves. The orca lingers for a moment, watching as its rival disappears into the depths, before turning its attention to the Artemis. There's a tense silence as the crew realizes they're now the only thing left in the orca's path. As the orca turns towards the Artemis, the crew stands frozen, feeling the weight of their vulnerability on the open sea. The massive creature circles them, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. Captain Henry's eyes dart around, looking for any sign of safety or escape, but there's nothing. Just miles of open water in every direction. They're trapped. "Cap, what do we do?" Jake whispers, gripping the rail so hard his knuckles turn white. Captain Henry's mind races. He knows orcas are intelligent, cunning hunters. They're known to coordinate attacks, working together to flip ice floes and knock seals into the water. But this orca is alone, and yet there's an unsettling intelligence in the way it moves, almost as if it's studying them. "Everyone stay calm," Henry says, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "No sudden movements. Let's not provoke it." The crew nods, swallowing their fear as they remain still, eyes glued to the water. The orca makes another slow pass, coming so close that they can see the white patches on its skin, the glistening black of its sleek body, and its cold, calculating eyes. Then, without warning, it disappears beneath the boat. A thick, uneasy silence falls over the deck. The men exchange nervous glances, straining to hear anything over the sound of the water lapping against the hull. Seconds tick by, stretching into what feels like minutes, and the tension grows unbearable. "Where did it go?" Tom mutters, his voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly the boat lurches to one side, nearly tipping over as something massive strikes the hull from below. The men stumble, grabbing onto ropes and railings to keep from being thrown overboard. Jake loses his footing and falls to his knees, his face pale as he stares at the rippling water. "It's testing us," Captain Henry says, his voice grim. "This orca, it's not just attacking out of hunger or defense. It's playing with us." The realization sends a chill through the crew. They're not dealing with an ordinary animal instinct. They're facing something far more calculated and dangerous. The orca resurfaces on the starboard side, exhaling in a loud, explosive puff that sends a spray of mist over the deck. It lingers there, watching them, almost as if it's waiting for their next move. Captain Henry takes a slow, steadying breath, trying to read the creature's intent. He's been on the sea his whole life, but he's never encountered an orca with behavior like this. "All right," he says finally, turning to his crew. "We need to get out of here. Start the engine. Slowly. Let's move away without drawing its attention." Tom scrambles to the controls, his hands shaking as he turns the key. The engine roars to life, and the boat begins to inch forward. The orca trails them, its eyes fixed on the vessel, maintaining a steady, almost predatory pace. They move cautiously, hoping that putting some distance between them and the creature will allow it to lose interest. For a moment, it seems to be working. The orca hangs back, keeping a good 10 yards between itself and the Artemis. But then, in a flash of motion, it dives again, disappearing beneath the waves. "Everyone, brace yourselves!" Captain Henry shouts, sensing what's about to happen. The orca strikes the hull with even more force this time, sending the boat rocking violently. The crew holds on for dear life as the impact reverberates through the vessel, making it groan and creak under the strain. The realization dawns on them all at once. The orca isn't trying to scare them off. It's attempting to capsize the boat. "Cap, if it hits us like that again, we're done for," Tom yells, panic creeping into his voice. Captain Henry knows he's right. They can't withstand another hit like that. Desperate, he racks his brain for a solution, something that could deter the orca or at least buy them some time. Then an idea strikes him, an old trick he'd heard from a seasoned fisherman years ago. "Get the flare gun," he orders, his voice steady despite the chaos. "If we can scare it off with a bright light, maybe it'll think twice about attacking again." Jake rushes to the storage locker, fumbling as he retrieves the flare gun. His hands are trembling, but he manages to load a flare, his face set with determination. Captain Henry takes the gun from him, aiming it toward the water where the orca last surfaced. He fires, and the flare arcs through the air, illuminating the water with a blinding red light. The orca re-emerges, momentarily disoriented by the sudden brightness. It hesitates, its massive body cutting through the water as it retreats slightly, seemingly wary of the strange fiery object in the air. But the effect is short-lived. The flare fizzles out, casting them back into the eerie twilight, and the orca resumes its pursuit, undeterred. "That barely bought us a second," Jake exclaims, his voice filled with despair. The crew's options are running out. The Artemis is still moving, but not fast enough to escape the orca's relentless attacks. Captain Henry grips the wheel, his mind racing through every possible strategy. But with each failed attempt to deter the orca, the grim reality becomes clearer. They might not make it out of this. Then, as if in answer to their silent prayers, they spot something in the distance. A large ship, its silhouette faint against the horizon. It's a cargo vessel, and it's heading in their direction. "Look, a ship!" Tom shouts, pointing toward the faint shape. "If we can just get close enough, maybe they'll see us." Captain Henry steers the Artemis toward the vessel, pushing the engine to its limits. The orca follows, but now there's a hint of hesitation in its movements, as if it senses the presence of the larger ship and knows it's outmatched. Come on," Henry mutters under his breath, his eyes fixed on the approaching vessel. The crew waves their arms, signaling desperately as the cargo ship draws closer. Moments later, the Artemis is within hailing distance, and they see figures on the deck of the larger ship, pointing in their direction. The orca hesitates, lingering just outside the reach of the cargo ship's shadow. It's as if the presence of the larger vessel has broken the spell, making the predator realize that its prey is now beyond its grasp. After a long, tense moment, the orca gives one last defiant slap of its tail before sinking back into the depths, disappearing as silently as it came. The crew exhales in unison, a wave of relief washing over them as they realize they're safe, for now. The cargo ship's crew helps tow the Artemis back to shore, and by the time they reach land, the sailors are shaken, but grateful to be alive.